there's a wholeness that's moving the person apart from who you think you are. One way to look at this is like saying we're all animated by the divine. You're not doing you. Who you think you are isn't doing you. The
Mhm.
divine's doing you. And the more you think it's you that's doing you,
Mhm.
the more of a resistant journey you're going to have.
And now for something completely different. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Still Mind Company. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes. The Still Mind Company's name. Today I felt compelled to make a clip of clips, a video of a bunch of different clips from my podcast. So if you're someone who's listened to my podcast before, you might hear some stuff in here that you've already heard. But for anybody who has not heard my podcast before, perhaps you didn't know I had one, here's a great little kind of trailer thing for it. Give you an idea of the type of guests that I have on, what we talk about, and all the good stuff. So, without further ado, I hope you enjoy.
A lot of us today are literate. And I think one important thing to remember is that religions came to people who were illiterate by people who knew the word. And to know the word, to know how to read and write was a massive privilege
Mhm.
when the Torah was written, when the New Testament was written, when the Quran was written. No one knew how to read. You
Mhm.
you had one guy holding a book in a town square reading out to everybody in there. Everybody's like, "Oh my god, magic man, how do you know how to translate this?" And today we can all we can all read and write, and I think, like, at this point, we should be writing our own myths, our mythology. Like, what is your myth? Where were
Yeah.
you born? How were you born? How did you grow up? What did you learn? And, like, you can make it as fantastic or as mundane as you want it to be. It's yours.
There's a basic proverb that's been handed down through the ages that if you don't fill your day with high priority actions that inspire you, it's going to fill up with low priority distractions that don't. If you don't
Mhm.
fill your mind with the worded words that articulate what is deeply meaningful, your life will fill up with words that don't. And if you
Mhm.
don't fill your time and your space and your energy and you don't feed your mind the highest priority things, it fills up with
Mhm.
stuff that's not inspiring. So, yeah, taking command of your words was something the gentleman taught me when I was 17. He says, what you think about, what you visualize, what you affirm, what you feel, and what you act upon tells me where you're headed.
Right.
So
Right.
when somebody comes to me and says, well, I don't know what I want to do. I just ask him, is that your most inspiring affirmation you want to tell yourself every day? You go, no. So how would you love to talk to yourself?
Mhm.
Well, I now know what I'm up to. I'm on a man on a mission. Great. Let's start there. And
Yeah.
let's start to ask ourselves what really is our life demonstrating. Because if you sit and argue for your limitations are going to be yours, if you keep focusing on the problem and not focusing on what changes it, it's going to keep
Mhm.
growing. So
Yeah.
it's the key is taking command of what you say and think and visualize and everything else. And that's always doable because we have command over those things. We can change our
Mhm.
perceptions, our decisions, and our actions. And one of the actions is speaking. We have control
Mhm.
over what we say. So we can do that and
Yeah.
change our life. Absolutely.
That's beautiful. So all the different books out there on the subconscious mind, I always find a common thread there. It's basically, if someone feels that their life is in disarray, the depression, anxiety, whatever, the subconscious mind is set up in a certain way because of the limiting beliefs that were fed to them throughout their life. So at the moment, you could look at it and say the subconscious mind is to the detriment of the person, but they have the ability to shift it, to rewire it, to get to that space where you're at. And I do think that yes, you were blessed, right, to be able to begin that work at age 17. And I have people I work with that are in that age group, and I'm always telling them, you have no idea how blessed you are to be starting this journey right now. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Exactly. Well, the thing is, even the subconscious mind, when it has all these different programs that we think are error, ultimately they're creating chaos and stress and distractions and frustrations to get us back to what's authentic. So
Mm-hmm.
that is still not an error. It's just not interpreted. I always say that, our fear is letting us know when we're holding on to fantasies and when we're not
Yeah.
being congruent with what we're really up to and what's really
Hmm.
meaningful to us. So it's not an enemy, it's actually a feedback if it's interpreted wisely. And it's the quality of
Right.
our lives based on the quality of the questions we ask. If we have amazing questions and we start to see life on the way, not in the way, then nothing really blocks us.
For your audience, I have my own podcast called Bioactive with Riley Kirk, where I talk about all these different types of molecules, but also what you kind of specialize in, which is the mindset, which is something that people oftentimes don't really think of when they think of a molecule being active and its medicinal potential. It's like your mind is the most active thing like ever created. And if you can't leverage your mind correctly, you're not going to be able to leverage your medicine correctly. So it's really this integration of both, yes, adding some active substances in your body, but also being able to integrate them and use them as a tool and not as a crutch, which is like this huge thing that you specialize in and you talk about so elegantly. And that's what I'm trying to get across to my audience too. It's like, you can't just keep putting drugs in your body with no intention and reflection. Like, you're still not going to get the full benefit from that.
They did the study where the observer effect basically proved that the way the experimenter could affect the outcome of the experiment by what he thought would happen, right? And so in terms of what I shared around the percentage and scale around what's actually physical in front of us versus what's just energy that is not in physical form yet, I do believe that our consciousness, the way that we choose to infuse that energy with intention, belief, it can form what we experience.
Yeah.
Right? So whether that's manifesting something into form or getting a job offer or, the collective world that we're living in, I think the only reason the world is the way that it is right now is because as a whole society, culture, humanity, we have observed it into this way, right? We've been passing beliefs and ways of thinking and feeling down generation by generation, and that's creating the world. And so if we want to shift, we get to realize our power and how our thoughts, our energy, our emotions, our energy, what we're choosing to put out, the world, the universe is picking up and following that. So we get to see what's not working, see how we've played a part in that, and then intentionally choose to move into, more positive thoughts, more loving thoughts, more connected states with the people around you, healing our trauma so that we don't continue creating a world where, people are hungry, people are suffering, people are killing each other. I do believe that's only happening because at some level we're allowing it to happen.
The thing is that many of us aren't even aware of it. And they're kind of these values that our parents passed on to us, that you're not allowed to show emotions. You're not allowed to feel or express emotions because your emotions, your big emotions are a burden to others. So then we naturally just learn to suppress and repress them. And as we get older, we define our coping mechanisms. Even if they're not healthy for us, they still are coping mechanisms and they serve us in some way. And healing from these tendencies is a lot about working through the deep-rooted shame that we're fundamentally flawed for having dependencies on substances, on social media, on whatever it is, and realizing like this did meet my needs. This has helped me, but I am able to grow. I'm able to practice new coping mechanisms for me that serve my greatest good and that help me heal. And it's okay that I was like that at one point. I'm not fundamentally flawed. But I can be honest with myself and work towards being healthier and more effective in my behaviors.
The hangups that we have about ourselves in life are really just misunderstandings about self and life, right? We have a confused assumption about
Mhm.
what's real,
Mhm.
and those assumptions distort reality in a
Mhm.
crazy way
Yeah.
to where it's like you're seeing a life that's not there at all.
Yeah.
And so, and it creates a big perceptual problem.
Mhm.
But again, it's just an innocent misunderstanding.
Mhm.
So if we just bring a little bit of clarity, it's
Yeah.
really amazing how quickly it can shift.
90 to 95% of their life is controlled by the subconscious mind, which is running on all of these programs, if you will. And so as they begin to work with their subconscious mind and install new programs, new belief structures and belief patterns, they're gradually shifting their subconscious mind to operate in a way that would benefit them. So you get to the space where when you're in autopilot mode, good shit's happening. You know, you're taking actions where you wouldn't have before unconsciously. So an example I've mentioned before, me and my relationship to physical health and the gym. I've had many times in my history that I went to the gym, you know, for a few months, you know, whatever, and would be into it, but then something would happen and I would regress, and then I wouldn't do it for a while. And it could be a stretch of a few years before I do it again. Then same thing. It'd be there for a little while, then it would go away at some point, and I end up going back to my old ways. It wasn't until a certain point in my journey, which is now, I feel like it's like 6 months ago, 6 or 8 months ago, I started going to the gym unconsciously. I just one day was like, you know, I'm ready to go to the gym. I want to go to the gym today. And I went and signed up, and I've been going to the gym ever since. Some weeks I go 3 times, some weeks I go 5 times, but I'm not stopping. I continue to go, and when I go, it's because I want to go. I like how it makes me feel. And there's not this unconscious pressure, because before, when I was going to the gym, it was an unconscious pressure to fix myself. You know, it wasn't, it was working out the body because fuck, I gotta get rid of this fucking fat or some shit. It wasn't working out the body because I love the body. And that's the difference. And so now I'm in a space where I am the lightest weight that I have been in a fucking long time. 215, 6'1".
There's 8 limbs of yoga, and we could go on for hours and hours about each of those limbs, but just out of those limbs, right, we have this physical practice, the asana, right, the various poses that we go into. And oftentimes in the Western world, a lot of the yoga practice is an asana practice, so it's physical movement, it's the poses. And I think that that's great. Like, asana is a great way into meditative states. It's a great way to, it's going to automatically engage your breath, especially if you're holding something like a plank, right? Your breath's going to start to move a little quicker. You're going to become aware of it. You're going to feel the sensations of it, right? So that's all a nice way and a nice entry into the body. But I think it's important to think about asana in its direct translation, which is a seat, right? So for me, and just historically in yoga, going back many years ago, especially pre-colonization, a lot of the yoga practice was seated postures for meditation and breath work, or in yoga what we'll call pranayama. And those seated poses were for those practices of going deeper through inquiry, self-inquiry, through meditation, right? Using the breath to build up energy and to notice what happens in the emotional state and in the mental state. And also contextually, like when yoga started, it's at least, in South Asia, started to build up, a lot of it was coming about because people were suffering. And so people wanted to figure out a way to liberate themselves from that suffering and to heal themselves there. And so I think it's important just to context that, because when you go to a yoga class, you're likely going to be going to an asana practice. There's going to be elements of yoga built into there, that overarching yoga, right? But most of it's going to be the poses. That said, I think it's important to look for a teacher who acknowledges the history of it, acknowledges the context, and acknowledges that, hey, what we're doing here is asana, and we're also going to bring in some elements of yoga, but making that distinction there, so the miscommunication of yoga stops happening in a way where it's just about the poses, right? And I think your experience is a good example of that, where, you get in there, you're like, oh, it's a beginner level practice type of thing. And then third pose in, you're like, my body doesn't do that, right? And I think a lot of people have that similar experience, and sometimes it pushes them away from the practice.
Thank you very much for listening to these clips from my podcast. If you enjoyed these clips, check out the link in the description. It'll take you over to Spotify, where I host the podcast. And maybe you'll like some of the other guests too, or you could listen to the entire podcast of one of the guests you may have enjoyed here. And yeah, comment below if you have anything to say that's nice, as your grandmama said, if you don't have nothing nice to say, well, just don't say nothing at all. But other than that, I love you all. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time.
Just you white in Reagan, just you white. You'll be sorry that your tears will be too light. Just you white in Reagan, just you white.